Guys, I remember my first time that I got the keys to the 1978 Ford F-250 Custom. Whew. Now, I know you're thinking how shiny and beautiful that thing is, but you're entirely incorrect. It was my grandpa's old farm truck that my parents bought because they had a new driver and thought, hey, this won't show any dents. And they were mostly right. That thing was a tank. My brother and I had a lawn service, and I was backing up, and I may have nudged a power pole, but you couldn't tell on the tank. The power pole was leaning a bit, but the tank, you couldn't even tell. As far as I was concerned, as far as my friends were concerned, that was my truck. Was it my truck? No, it's my parents' truck. But I was, rather than the owner, I was a steward. And like most 16-year-olds, I was as good of a steward as most, some, a few. We're not always good stewards, are we? The thing is, today we're going to unpack a similar concept where Jesus is giving the keys of the kingdom to Peter. And we are in Matthew 16. We're going to focus in verses 19 today, though we're going to go through 20. And we're actually going to start in verse 13 because we want to make sure we have the context of what's going on here. So if you brought your Bibles with you, go ahead and open up to Matthew 16. We're going to start in verse 13. Those of you joining us at home, we're going to have it on lower thirds. And we're also going to have it up on the screen as well. So let's go ahead and read. Now when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" And they said, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." And he said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" And Simon Peter replied, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." Then he strictly charged the disciples to tell no one that he was the Christ. Now, each section that we've been reading as we've been in this little mini-series within the larger series, The Way of Jesus, has had to be slowly excavated because there's been a significant diversity in opinions to its meaning and its applications. And today's not any different. Today, we have another section that has been taken a lot of different directions, and we don't want to get caught up in the weeds. And yet, we need to unpack it. As a note, what we're talking about today is not salvific. It's not a salvation issue. Today, what we're talking about should not be a point of separation. But I hope that today, what we're talking about brings better insight, a better understanding, and at the minimum, let's just have a conversation about what's going on here. Jesus is talking to Peter in verse 19, and he, Jesus, is going to be giving the keys of the kingdom to Peter. Now, this doesn't really matter on what keys that they are, because we know three elements about keys. First, we know the two ways the keys work. They either unlock something or they lock something. That's just the way keys are. They unlock something or they lock something. Now, this also goes to show that there is a symbolicness to keys. That's the other thing that we see about keys. So, when you think of a ring of keys, who has those keys? Just any set of keys. When I first think of keys, since I was focusing on the pickup analogy, I thought of my old high school janitor. He had a huge set of keys. Now, what does that tell you about his authority? Well, that he has the authority to unlock a lot of doors. So when we're looking at Peter, and Jesus gives him keys, we see that the keys have the function of locking or unlocking, and that he has a level of authority because he has these keys symbolically. Now, here's the question. Does Peter have ownership? I didn't have ownership of my truck. See, I even call it my truck. I didn't have ownership of the truck I drove. The janitor does not have ownership of the facility he cleans, and Peter does not have ownership of the kingdom of heaven. Rather, it is a stewardship relationship in all three of those. Peter has a stewardship of this area. The janitor has a stewardship over the facility that is cleaned, and I had stewardship, though poorly executed, over the truck that I drove. So this tells us that there is an element of authority that Peter has within the region, though he does not necessarily have ownership, he does not have ownership of that indeed. Now, this is a well-known Old Testament picture, because we see that both in Isaiah and in Revelation, this concept of keys being given to someone that symbolize an authority, sometimes an authority that's even over the family itself, because they have stewardship of what they've been given. So, we know that Peter has authority. We know that he has stewardship. But what does he have authority directly over? Let's go back to verse 19. It says, I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be loosed, and whatever you bind on, let's go back. I will give you the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. There we go. You see the word whatever? Peter has authority over whatever. Now, when I say whatever, I'm not thinking of the 1990s teenager, whatever. I'm talking about whatever as in anything and everything having to do with that item. So he has authority over this whatever, anything. However, some have taken the whatever and understood it to mean direct authority over who enters the kingdom and who is not allowed to enter the kingdom. D.A. Carson talked about the concept that he has the authority because he preached the gospel, and some people come to know Jesus, therefore they've been loosed, and some people don't come to know Jesus, and therefore they have been bound, a very indirect concept. Roman Catholic tradition has a papal authority where they have this concept of literally being able to lock people out of the kingdom and unlock it for others. And yet, R.T. France has a concept here that really unlocked, no pun intended, the concept in a different way. He sees Peter declaring what is permitted and not permitted. That it's about rules and teaching, not about eternal destinies. And I find this concept very, not coming to me word-wise, has a strong argument toward it. And here's part of the reason. Peter actually opens the door to the Gentiles in Acts 10, right? Not to open the door in eternity, but opens the door and says, yes, this is a valid teaching, that it's okay that the Gentiles have entered in. Did he actually change it for the Gentiles? No, he was told by God that they were already allowed. And then he shares it with others. He disciplines Ananias and Sapphira in Acts 5. Now, if you're familiar with Ananias and Sapphira sold a plot of land, told the church that the money they gave the church was all the money that they had received, and then kept a portion to themselves. Was that a problem? No, but telling the church was all lying was a problem. And Peter calls them out, and they ended up dead. Did he lock them out of the kingdom? No. He's saying that activity is not acceptable. He confronts Simon the sorcerer in Acts 8. Simon the sorcerer was a guy who tried to buy the acts of the Spirit. He could do many things by the acts of evil. He comes to know Jesus, sees the disciples do amazing outward signs, and he wants that same power, tries to buy it. And Peter says, that's not okay. So Peter is declaring right and wrong, but he is not declaring who can enter heaven and not enter heaven. This is a very important element. I think it's a very strong element because we don't see anywhere in Scripture anyone other than Jesus allowing or denying access to heaven. Now, beyond this, Peter's not doing it alone. Peter has the rest of the disciples with him. He is a leader amongst equals rather than the only one with this ability. In fact, flip over a couple pages to Matthew 18 and starting in verse 15. Jesus is talking to all the disciples here, and he says, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his faults. Listen, or between you and him alone. If he listens to you, you have gained a brother. But if he does not listen, take one or two others along with you, that every charge may be established by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. If he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church, the ecclesia, if you will. That would be the same word used here. Tell it to the church, and if he refuses to listen even to the church, let him be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. Truly I say to you, whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Again I say to you, if two of you agree on earth about anything they ask, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven. For where there are 2 or 3 gathered in my name, there I am among them. So you have Jesus giving the keys to the kingdom now to the disciples in general. Whereas with Peter, he's like, hey, here's the keys to the kingdom. And it doesn't seem to have a lot of caveats. Here in chapter 18, we have Jesus giving the keys to the kingdom to the disciples in general. And says, hey, where 2 or 3 of you together agree on something, then it's bound, loosed. Okay. What goes beyond this is that section about brothers or people who wrong us, we're supposed to go to them, and then if they don't listen, we take somebody else with us. Is that process just for the disciples? No, it's a process that we have as well. That's the process that we're told to run as well, which means if that process is for the disciples and it's also for us, that means the keys are for the disciples and they're also for the body. That's right. You've been given the keys of the kingdom. You've been given the keys to something greater than my Ford F-250 Custom. But how far does that go? Because my first thought was, how often have I been told something was evil or wrong and it's really not? How often have I been told something is okay and it's really not? Just how far does this binding and loosing go as long as 2 or 3 of us agree on it? Like, could you and I and I'll get one other person together and we'll decide that only the Denver Broncos are allowed to be rooted for? I'm sorry, it's been bound. That's the way it is, guys. That's it is. Broccoli is also the only acceptable vegetable, but only with cheese. Sorry. My vegetarians, that's just the way it is. That's the only thing you can eat from now on. Is that how it works? Like we can just choose things to bind? No. And honestly, throughout church history, the church has been notorious of making rules that Jesus didn't make, just like the Pharisees did with the Mosaic Law. Like many of the rules that have been put into place to try to help people in a world of gray turn into burdens that people have to carry. No rock and roll, or for more modern, no rap music. No movies, no alcohol, no tobacco, no cards, no dances, no makeup, no jewelry. And if we want to go with the Pilgrims and some of that, literally no fun and definitely no Christmas. I kid you not, the Puritans outlawed Christmas. So are they right? Did they bind it and we are evil now for celebrating Christmas? No, because that's not how it works. This group of verses in Matthew 18 have been used to leverage many things. Saying if it's evil, we say it's evil, or we say it's good, and therefore it is. But that's not how the elements work together. 2 people can't just get together and bind or loose something in heaven or on earth. An interesting element of about keys is they have to be used in the right location and used in the right way to work. Your car key will not work if it's not in range. Those of you with electronic keys that you can leave in your pocket and you just have to hop in, if you're too far away, your car will not start. Those of us with mechanical keys, it has to be actually inserted and then turned to actually start the car. It must be used in the correct way or it will not work. It has to be in the right location or it will not work. And the same is true for the keys of the kingdom. When Peter or the other disciples or we as a gathering or 2 or 3 believers, I love that Jesus isn't saying, hey, the whole body has all got to get together. No, just 2 or 3 of us together. If that occurs, then it still has to be done in a correct way and on the correct grounds. So what are you saying, Pastor Neil? Here's the thing. First of all, the things that we are talking about must be in alignment with the things of God and therefore the gospel of God. So when I say only the Broncos are allowable to be rooted for, that has nothing to do with the gospel, does it? That has nothing to do with the things of God. Not even during football season, all right? That's just a thing that's just been made up. No Christmas. That's just something that's made up. It was probably made up for a reason that seems very spiritual, but it's just made up. It doesn't have force. It's not in alignment with who God is and therefore the gospel of God, the good news of Jesus coming and saving us and rescuing us. So the keys must be in the right location. They must be in alignment with the things of God and therefore the gospel of God. And in fact, it turns out that the syntax in verse 19 makes it sound the syntax there makes it sound that when Peter and the other disciples or a church declares something, that heaven then modifies itself to come into alignment with that declaration. What does that mean? So again, if we say Christmas is evil, or only the Broncos, or only broccoli, it sounds like by us making that declaration, heaven will now validate what we just said. Yet, the syntax in verse 19 turns out that it doesn't mean that. Okay, what does it mean? Because the ESV says, it shall be bound in heaven, shall be loosed in heaven. Sounds like we declare something and heaven catches up. But the Greek actually uses something called a future perfect passive. My English people will be like, oh, I know what that means. For the rest of us, it means it literally translates, will have been bound, will have been untied. Jesus is telling Peter that the changes, or when he declares something, it's not that heaven comes into alignment with him, but rather he's declaring something that heaven has already made the determination, has already done, which means he is coming in alignment with heaven. This is huge. It's not us declaring something and heaven endorsing it. It's us declaring what heaven has already done. We're not the initiators. We're the stewards announcing the owner's decisions. That's a massive shift, isn't it? It's a shift saying, we recognize God already does this. We recognize God already is this way and coming in alignment with him, rather than trying to force God to do what we think he should do. Now, how often do we try to get God to do what we think he should do? Consciously, probably not super often, though maybe some. Unconsciously, all the time. It's for this reason that the statement Jesus makes about Peter, the other disciples, in Matthew 18, is a transference to us as the body of believers, and it only works or applies when we're in alignment with God and the gospel. Because we are coming in alignment with him and not the other way around. Now, to illustrate this, because you might say, well, Pastor Neil, I don't know about that whole thing. I get it. look down here. We're going to read it just in a second here. Matthew 16, 21 to 23. Jesus is telling the disciples that he has to suffer and die and then rise again. And Peter, being told that he's been given the keys, essentially says, "Nuh-uh, over my dead body." Which we get. We'd probably tell our friends the same thing. Now, does Jesus throw his hands up and be like, "Okay, you've got the keys to the kingdom. Looks like I'm stuck"? No. Let's read 16:23. But he turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but the things of man." He doesn't throw his hands up and, I guess I can't do anything. You've given you the keys. No. Jesus, as the owner, says, "Get behind me." You don't get it. Guys, for the keys to be valid, they must be in alignment with God and thus the gospel of God. Okay, we've said this a lot. So what do we do with this? Well, I think there's three things that we need to remember. First of all, Peter got the keys, but Jesus stayed in the driver's seat. And that's the same for us. Peter was given real authority. But it didn't mean that Peter had a supernatural latitude to lock people out of heaven or to absolve sin. Those things are only things God can do. And we don't hold the keys to make heaven follow us. We hold the keys to declare what the kingdom of heaven has already done. That's a pretty cool thing. We don't have to be scared that we're going to use them incorrectly. We don't have to be scared that we're accidentally going to lock somebody out or let someone in we shouldn't, because we don't have that power. We have the power to announce what God has already done. The gathering is the one that Jesus builds and the one that focuses on him, and he holds the authority. We are to take the gospel to the world. We're not to build more rules and regulations and stack requirements on the backs of people and making it harder for them to get to God. We're to come into alignment with him, and Jesus stays in that driver's seat. Second of all, the keys only work when the steward is driving in the same direction as the owner. Peter shows in Matthew 16:23 how easy it is to fall out of alignment. I highly doubt Peter thought he was out of alignment with God. I highly doubt he was like, "I know this isn't what God wants, but forget God, we're going to do what I want to do." I believe Peter probably thought he was doing a righteous and good thing. "No, Jesus, you're not going to die." But how often do we think we're doing a righteous thing, something that God would want, and we're actually out of alignment with him? One minute Peter's declaring that Jesus is Christ, the next minute he's telling Christ he can't go to the cross. His heart told him he was going in the same direction, but he wasn't. Now, if I'm driving that F-250 and I decide to drive to a location that my dad tells me not to go to, maybe I decide to take it to the next town. Was I exercising stewardship? No, I was stealing the truck. The keys only work when the steward is driving in the same direction as the owner. We need to be driving as the same direction as the owner. Now, third, guys, we need to stay aligned the same way we stay headed in the right direction on a long trip. I have some friends that were trying to drive to California, and this was the back in the day with old school maps, and they read that map, and they worked it hard, and they ended up at the Mississippi River. They didn't know how to check their bearings. They didn't know how to make sure they were headed in the right direction. So let me share this with you. Daily time with God in prayer and the Word keeps us calibrated. Gathering with others who love Jesus, who are trustworthy to share, to be accountable, to worship with, reinforces keeping Jesus in that driver's seat rather than placing us there. Which is one of the reasons we gather on Sunday, or when we gather. It's one of the reasons we are in small groups. It's one of the reasons that we spend time together and talk about God, because it reinforces keeping Jesus there rather than what is natural of saying we should be driving and not even realizing it. So guys, we've been given something much better than the keys to that 78 Ford F-250 Custom. We've been entrusted with the gospel. The gospel, the good news of the living God. So let's make sure that we're driving in the same direction as the one who handed us those keys. Let's pray.